The Grizzly Boatman. It had been a good winter's trapping, the best Francois could remember. He thought as he loaded the canoe with furs. It wouldn't be long until he was home, sitting by his fireside, toasting his toes. Only one major problem lay between him and that cosy fireside glow. The Devil's Jaws. The Devil's Jaws was the most fearsome stretch of rapids in all Canada. Francois would have been quaking in his large brown boots if it hadn't been for the fact that Sylviane would take the prow of the canoe, and Sylviane was the best man in a canoe in all Canada. When the two friends set off, you'd have thought they were off to a party. Laughing and joking, they paddled down the river with hardly a fear in their minds. But they weren't that foolhardy to treat the Devil's Jaws with disrespect. When the water began to get choppy and the foam began to rise, they pulled the canoe to the bank and tied it fast. You needed a good solid meal in your stomach and a good few hours' rest before you paddled through the Devil's Jaws, even with Sylviane guiding the way. Francois wasted no time shooting a rabbit for their tea, while Sylviane made up a fire. They sat watching the rabbits sizzle at the spit, and thought they were the luckiest of men. But another nose caught a waft of that delicious aroma, and he wasn't about to turn down an invitation to such a feast. The first the two knew of their guest was a cracking of twigs in the bushes, which grew to the sound of an approaching storm, as their new friend wasted no time looking for his seat. Can you imagine our two trappers, with eyes like soup bowls, when that grizzly joined them for tea? They didn't stay frozen for long. Sylviane was off like a jackrabbit, and Francois had his gun to his eye before even he realized it. But as Francois squeezed his finger tightly around the trigger and wasn't greeted by a gratifying bang, he realized that rabbit had been the ungrateful recipient of his last cartridge. Francois flung the gun and caught the grizzly across the muzzle, and he ran for his life. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but if you invite someone to lunch with you, and when he arrives you start kicking up a fuss trying to shoot him and hitting him on the nose with your gun, it's not the best way to put him at his ease. Well, the grizzly wasn't best pleased with his reception. He let out a howl and was off to the races, claws at the ready, just itching to show Francois how he felt. Now, Sylviane probably would have laughed if he'd been around to watch, but as he was heading for the next territory at a rate of knots, he missed the absurd scene that followed. There was Francois running round and round a tree, closely followed by one extremely angry bear. Round and round they went until you couldn't have told who was chasing who. They got dizzier and dizzier until, luckily for Francois, the bear, who didn't have a head for this sort of game, went staggering off straight into a neighbouring tree, cannoned off that into another, and, senseless, blundered off into the wood, accompanied by the occasional crack as his head made contact with yet another forest giant. Francois was in no hurry to go wandering unless he should renew an acquaintance with his new friend. He waited until dark and made his way back to the river, and thank heavens, who was there but Sylviane, all ready and waiting in the canoe? Now, maybe it wasn't a good idea to go through the Devil's Jaws in the middle of the night, but if one man could do it, that man was Sylviane. So, not bothering to churlishly bring up the little matter of Sylviane leaving him to his fate, Francois jumped in behind Sylviane in his bearskin coat and hat and pushed off. What a journey! You would never believe it if I told you the half of it. Whirlpools, rocks the size of mountains, and waterfalls the depth of a house. But with Sylviane at the helm, what had Francois to fear? After what seemed an hour or more of being tossed this way and that, the water began to calm, and Francois let his tired head loll. He was exhausted. He was sure Sylvie Ann wouldn't mind if he took a short nap. Now, there are good ways to wake in the morning, and there are bad. Well, I don't think Francois has the sight that greeted his eyes next morning on his list of favourites. As he woke, he saw in front of him a great grizzly bear, and just couldn't hold back an astonished yip. Now that bear had been dazed and confused, but a few solid hours' sleep had put him right, and having woken just exactly like a bear with a sore head, he wasn't about to put up with anyone creeping up behind him and yipping. He got to his feet and turned around. There are times to wait for formal introductions and times when it is better to take your leave. This, thought Francois, was one of the latter. He jumped overboard and swam in a mad panic for the bank. The bear wasn't quite so sure about taking a bath. The last Francois saw of him was as the sole passenger of a wildly swaying canoe full of all those wonderful furs heading off downriver. After drying off, Francois made the long trudge back home a broken man. When he reached the trading post, he created quite a stir. Everyone thought he was dead. They had found his canoe by a log jam with bear tracks leading away. And what of his fair-weather friend? Well, Sylvie Ann had hitched a ride home with some Indians, and had written off his friend as a man from his past. Well, yes, they were both rich men that spring from those furs the bear had so kindly delivered. But believe it or believe it not, those two men never went trapping together again.